Thank you for your passion and your caring for the people of Aleppo and Syria. History will judge you well, Senator McCain. I've been proud to be by your side, but let's be honest with each other. It's just not the Obama administration that's the problem here. Where's the United Nations? A convoy carrying aid to Aleppo was bombed, and we all believe it was by the Russians. What has the UN done? What about the countries in the region who border Syria? What have they done? Our friends in France who have been attacked several times based on Raqqa's ability to project force, ISIL's ability to project force by having the caliphate and Syria. They've dropped bombs. All of us have used air power. Where is Trump? If you can understand what he would do differently, I'd love to hear you. I don't understand. I can tell you this, Secretary Clinton really disappointed me when you said no ground forces in Iraq and Syria. So the bottom line is the world is...
I asked my colleague, when former Secretary of State Clinton said no ground troops in Iraq or Syria, do you think that means the 4,500 have to be withdrawn that are there now? Does she really believe that you can destroy ISIS with air power alone, which was basically what she said last night?
Yeah. Well, yes, I agree. We have over 5,000 troops on the ground in Iraq, and if you count the people who come and go, it's closer to 7,000. So from their point of view, I think that's a pretty offensive statement. We've lost one SEAL, and other people are definitely at risk. So we live in an interesting time. It's probably much like the 30s when Hitler was building up, and I'm not saying Assad is Hitler, I'm not saying Putin's Hitler, but I am saying that there's evil on the march, and most people are not doing anything about it. If you're in Aleppo right now, you feel like the Jewish people must have felt in the 30s and other countries who are being overrun by evil, when a lot of people just sat along the sidelines and issued statements. Samantha Powers, who I've known and actually personally like her. Do you think anybody listens to you, Samantha? Do you think anybody cares what you say because it's just all words? You've been up there for months now, and every ceasefire agreement has been broken. To my good friend John Kerry, you said it'd be a diplomatic malpractice not to try to get a ceasefire solution. At what point does it become malpractice to misread the person you're talking to? At what point will you understand that the Russians are not interested in a ceasefire agreement? They want to install Assad in a military fashion so that he cannot be ever taken out of power, which means they win. So to me, the real crime here is that the world, not just Obama, has let this happen, and to the people in this body. Several years ago, we had an authorization to use military force debate after Assad used chemical weapons in violation of the red line that President Obama drew. To Senator McCain's credit, and I went with him, is during Labor Day several years ago, the president called us up and said, I'm going to take action because it's clear to us that Assad used chemical weapons. We went outside the Oval Office in the driveway and stood by our president, called the Speaker of the House, Mr. Boehner, who stood with the president. There was a lot of Republican support for the idea that the president must act to put this brutal man back in check. That was early in the week, and by Friday, President Obama takes a stroll in the Rose Garden with Dennis McDonough, and all of a sudden, now we're coming to Congress. I've yet to get a call. I read it in the paper. And when it came to Congress, it completely melted down. People on our side objected to the use of force, saying we'd be the Air Force for al-Qaeda. People on our side did not understand what it meant to draw a red line and not use some force. There's plenty of blame to go around. People on the Democratic side almost never come to the floor and challenge what's going on in Syria. President Obama's getting a complete pass, except from pockets like Senator McCain and every now and then editorial. Why? Most people don't care about Syria because it seems distant. And when you talk about the young boy, it breaks our heart, then we move on. Most people thinking that we can't get involved ever again in the Mideast because it's just hopeless over there. Here's what I would suggest to you that we learn. That if you let Syria continue to deteriorate, you'll regret it. The King of Jordan, one of our best allies, is being overrun with Syrian refugees. 1 in 5 children in Lebanon are Syrian refugees. This war will never end until America leads. Back to Obama. You and your administration are very deceitful when it comes to foreign policy. You're the ones that told us in Benghazi that this was a protest caused by a hateful video rather than an organized terrorist attack for weeks. Secretary Clinton in the debate last night said that the reason we had no troops in Iraq is because the Iraqis did not want them and would not agree to leave some troops behind. All I can say is that's a lie. I know that to be a lie because I was called by her before the decision to leave was made, and she asked that myself, Senator McCain, and Senator Lieberman go to Iraq to talk to the parties about a follow-on force. We did. We went to Prime Minister Maliki, President Barzani of the Kurds, and Mr. Alawi, who was representing the Shia group, the Arakia Party, I believe it's called. The bottom line is we left there with the understanding that all 3 groups would work with each other to have a follow-on force because they understood the need for it. But this is the moment I'll never forget as long as I live. During the meeting with Prime Minister Maliki, when it was my turn to ask him questions, he turned to me before I could speak and says, "How many troops are you talking about leaving?" I turned to General Austin, who was the commander, and Ambassador Jeffries, who was the ambassador at the time. I said, "General, what is the answer to the Prime Minister's question?" And he said, "We're still working on that." Here's the truth. There never was a protest outside the consulate in Benghazi. It was always a terrorist attack, and they should have never had the ambassador there to begin with, and they left him hanging. Here's the truth. They wanted to leave. The Obama administration wanted to leave. They wanted to get to 0 to fulfill a campaign promise. And the reason that the general could not answer Prime Minister Maliki's question is because the White House was trying to get the numbers down to the point where it wouldn't matter if you left anybody because they were so low. So you can say a lot about Trump. You can say a lot about Republicans, and a lot of it's true. You can say a lot about President Obama and Hillary Clinton when it comes to Iraq. But the one thing you can't say, it was the Iraqis' fault that we left. And the reason I will not tolerate that is because too many people fought and died to get Iraq back in a better place. The surge did work, and they held it as a success. Back to Syria. If you don't realize that we have several hundred people on the ground today in Syria, you're dishonoring them. If you don't realize that the strategy Obama's come up with will never work, you're not doing your homework. The people we're training, ladies and gentlemen, to take ISIL down and to hold Raqqa after you take ISIL down are YPG Kurds. That may not mean anything to you, but it means a lot to the region. The Kurdish element that's being trained cannot hold Raqqa, cannot liberate Raqqa. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Dunford said that. So the people we're relying on to destroy ISIL can't take them down and hold the territory because it's an Arab town. And the people we're training to fight ISIL, the vast majority of the force, has no interest in going after Assad. And if you leave Assad in power, the war never ends. 450,000 people have been slaughtered by Assad's forces, mostly through barrel bombing and brutal tactics. And there is no plan to create a military counter-push coming from the Syrians themselves to create negotiating space. Without power, there is no diplomacy. So the force to destroy ISIL will never be successful in holding the territory. The force we're training to destroy ISIL has no interest in going after Assad, and if you leave Assad in power, this never ends. So this whole foreign policy approach of the Obama administration is ill-conceived, short-sighted, and deceitful. And they know everything I'm saying is true. There are people in the White House who know that the reason we left Iraq was because of politics in the White House. There are people in the White House who know, and the Pentagon who know, that the Kurdish force being trained can't get the job done. They're just trying to buy time until the next president comes along. So all I can say about Syria is it seems to be a faraway place with strange sounding names. It seems to be something we shouldn't get involved in the minds of a lot of people. The one thing I would challenge you to think about is that the last time powers gathered up to murder and butcher hundreds of thousands of people, it eventually mattered to us. It's going to matter to you sooner than you think, because all these children who've lost their parents and all these parents who lost their children are looking at us, and they're going to hate our guts along with the world community at large because we sat on the sidelines and watched it happen. Come with me and Senator McCain to a refugee camp and look into these kids' eyes. I see brokenhearted children who need somebody to help them and a good investment. The terrorists see a recruiting opportunity, a literal gift from the world at large. So you may not think it will affect you, but I promise you that the policies of the Barack Obama administration when it comes to Syria are going to haunt the world for generations if we don't do something about it soon and change course.
I'd mentioned to my colleague who mentioned this meeting that we had with Maliki about maintaining residual force. And I'd also like to point out to my colleague that the reason given by Obama and that then Secretary of State Clinton was that we couldn't get a status of forces agreement with the Iraqi government, which then would not make it tenable for our troops to remain. We now have 40 or 5,000, whatever it is there. Where's the status of forces agreement that was so necessary then? It's not there because they want it out. And by the way, I believe it was the President of the United States that said, we're leaving behind the most peaceful, prosperous, and democratic Iraq in its history. And last night, Mr. Trump was right when he said that Al-Qaeda went to Syria and became ISIS. We had Al-Qaeda defeated. It was over. But I'd also remind my colleague of the time where one of the most consequential hearings in the history of the Armed Services Committee was when we were about to have a resolution through the Congress calling for the withdrawal of all troops because our strategy had failed. There was no strategy. The senator from South Carolina and I called for the resignation and the firing of the then Secretary of Defense of our own president, George W. Bush, because we were failing. And then along came the surge and David Petraeus. And it was then Senator Clinton at that hearing who said, in whoever wrote it for, clever style, I would have to have a willing suspension of disbelief in order to think that the surge will work. She was wrong then, she's wrong now. Because the surge did work, thanks to the sacrifice of so much precious American blood at places like Fallujah. And then we had it won. And then the worst lie that I have seen in my time in the United States Senate was this, well, we couldn't have stayed because we had to withdraw. That is a lie. We could have stayed. Senator from South Carolina just described the meeting we had with Maliki. The fact is clear. Al-Qaeda then moved to Syria. It became ISIS, and now we have seen the consequences of the abject failure of that administration, that president, and that Secretary of State. You cannot deny the facts. So all I'd say to my friend from South Carolina, this didn't have to happen. But what is happening now as a consequence of that failure, as much as we want to revisit history, is we could stop it now. We could stop it now. We could declare a no-fly zone. We could have a 100,000-person force, 90% of them Sunni Arab countries, and go into Raqqa and take them. We could tell Bashar Assad he's got to stop the slaughter. The barrel bombs have to stop. The bucket buster bombs have to stop, or we will take their planes out of the air. And you know what would happen? I'd say to my friend from South Carolina, the next time one of them was shot down after dropping bombs and these terrible weapons on innocent civilians, it would stop.
Well, you've been a fighter pilot in combat, flying for your nation, and you know what it's like to risk your life. I would say this: if we had an American president who would tell the Russian president that we're going to train forces inside of Syria to replace Assad because Assad must go for the benefit of the region and the world at large, and if you come after the forces we train, then you put your own people at risk, they wouldn't come. If you shot down one Syrian jet who was trying to bomb innocent people or the people we're training, it'd be hard to get the next pilot to fly. That's the fact. That's a fact, I think. Here's the other fact. We're doing none of that. We're watching people get slaughtered. But here's the question for those who want to be president and for this body. You're never going to win in Iraq again unless you have some troops left behind this time. So here's the question. Let's say we liberate Mosul. And that's going to be hard to do with the number of troops we have on the ground, because every American soldier is a force multiplier, a trainer, advisor, bringing capability to the fight that the Iraqis don't have themselves. So everyone we have over there within reason ensures the demise of ISIL and accelerates the chance of destroying ISIL and not having to rely on the Shia militia from Iran. So if you're worried about Iran being the big winner in Iraq, you should be, because they are. The only way you're going to stop this dynamic is to have more American forces, somewhere around 10,000, and we're getting close, about 7 now, and they have to stay behind to keep Iraq from falling apart again. That's my humble opinion. John McCain has been far more right than he's been wrong. And everybody tells us every time we suggest something, well, that'll create a lot of problems. All I can say is, at what point do you realize that we got a lot of problems? This thing is going to get worse if it doesn't get better, and the only way for it to get better is to do something different. So the 5,000 troops are appreciated. Incrementally, they're doing what we suggested 3 years ago. We're still not there, but look at Syria. Here's my warning to the American people and the world at large. What we have on the ground in Syria cannot possibly destroy ISIL and hold the territory. You're going to need a lot more troops from the region who would be welcomed in the area in question. The Kurds cannot liberate Raqqa. They cannot destroy ISIL. They cannot hold the territory. Until you get regional forces involved, this will never work, and you'll never have any diplomatic solution until there's military pressure put on Assad. Currently, if you are joining the American effort to destroy ISIL, you're prohibited from going after Assad. The people in Syria and the region want two things: the destruction of ISIL, the removal of Assad, who has been the butcher of Damascus. We're not providing the second. The Russians and the Iranians are all in behind Assad. We have abandoned the people who joined our cause years ago. 4 years ago, Assad was on the ropes. Obama blinked. The rest is history. But going forward, if we don't have a different ground component in Syria, we'll never destroy ISIL and hold the territory. We'll never end the war without putting military pressure on Assad. And that's going to require regional commitment with an American component. And if you don't do that, another 9/11 is coming here, because they have the ability to plan and project force. You've seen it in Paris. You've seen it in other places. I'm not talking about one or two people. I'm talking about a group of people that can do a lot of damage to the United States. And every day that we let Syria get worse, every day ISIL enjoys the ability to operate, the longer it takes to get them destroyed, the more at risk we are. So this strategy won't work. Secretary Clinton's approach is no different than Obama's. She's for a no-fly zone. I give her credit for that. But if you don't realize we need a new ground component in Syria, then you're giving ISIL the time they need to send their forces throughout the world, including here. And they're coming here if we don't stop them over there, and our plan to stop them over there will never work unless you change it.
I would leave my